All right, guys, so here it is. My first ever cutting board. It's a hard maple ingrain cutting board. You can see I've got the Missouri Tigers logo in there. Um, this, I had some struggles with this board. The first part of it went pretty well. Glue up went fine, although I did figure out I don't have the right type of clamps or enough clamps to do this type of work. It was a struggle, but all in all, it went okay. I did see that Izzy Swan put out a video last month sometime on a panel clamping setup, and so I may try to make one of those in the future, just for doing, both cutting boards and picture frames and things like that. I'll put a link to that video down in the description because it's kind of a cool setup. But glue up went pretty good. After that, I put my stencil on here for the logo, and I used my Dremel with a router base and just used a carbide burr CNC bit. It's an 1/8 inch shank, and I hand routed that. You saw that earlier. All of that went really well. I started running into issues with the epoxy. So I think I messed up and I failed to mix the epoxy long enough, because when I poured it, after like 3 or 4 days, it still was not curing. And so I put this down in my basement close to the wood stove because it's the warmest spot of the house. Unfortunately, the relative humidity down by the wood stove was very low. So I got some contraction up here in a couple of these pieces at the top, and it could have been a combination of contraction of the wood and possibly not enough glue in that joint. I had glue squeeze out along every joint during the glue up, but maybe it was just enough glue right at the edge and not in the middle of the joint, I don't know. But I had some contraction and I developed a pretty good, pretty wide split up here, and then I got another little one down here. I found a technique on YouTube, I'll post a link to that as well, where I used my shop vac to suck glue all the way to the bottom of the joint. So I applied painter's tape on the front and back of the board, where the split is. I just pooled some wood glue there, and at the bottom I just peeled the painter's tape up just so a little bit of the crack was visible, and I stuck my shop vac on there and it sucked the glue down through the joint. Really cool technique. I did it sucked from the front and the back. Pulled glue all the way down through, kept adding glue up top, and then I clamped it back shut, and so I've got a nice tight joint there. You can't even really see it from the front. See it from the back a little bit and from the top, but it's solid all the way through. My epoxy, as I said, I think after 10 days I was just like, okay, I'm giving up on this board. I'm either gonna have a giant piece of scrap firewood, or I can try to finish it and salvage it and see what happens. So, but I overfilled the epoxy just to make sure that I left it proud of the surface, and it was just super tacky. I decided to bite the bullet, put some rough grit paper on my belt sander, and just started taking the top layer of that epoxy off. It was slinging gummy epoxy all over the place, but I was able to get it down pretty close to flush. I also tried it with my random orbit sander. The belt sander seemed to do a better job getting that gummy stuff off. Unfortunately, I think because of the heat of the sanding, it started to pull some of the gummy epoxy out of the inlay part, and so I had some low spots, which, I guess would have been all right, but I wanted a complete smooth surface. So I took a chance and ran it back through my planer just to take off a few skim coats, and luckily it worked out great. I did end up with a little bitty tiny chip out here. I think some of that could have been avoided. I had the edge chamfered at first, but as I took some layers off, that chamfer went away, and once that chamfer went away, that's when I got a little chip out there. But it sanded out pretty smooth. You can just barely feel it, so it'll be all right. The inlay is a little bit translucent, so you can kind of see through it. I tinted my epoxy with some charcoal, powdered charcoal, and I've seen people have really good luck with that. I think I just failed to add enough charcoal, so it's not opaque, it's just translucent. Same with the letters. I can see the tooling marks underneath the epoxy, but from a distance, it looks great. The epoxy's pretty much cured. The sample cup that I had was, the very bottom of the cup was like rock hard. It was that top layer that just stayed sticky, and the same thing on this board. So it's pretty hard. I can, if I press my fingernail into it, it will leave a slight indentation, so it's not fully rock hard cured, but I'm giving this in a gift exchange at a friends party that we have every year, and I'm just going to tell whoever ends up with it to use the backside to cut, use this side to be pretty. But turned out great. I'm glad I was able to salvage it, and I look forward to making more cutting boards in the future. I also made this little stand. I just freehanded this cutout. I've just got opposing slots there so that it can flat pack, and then it just slots together and got a nice display stand. So that's it. That's my cutting board adventure. As I mentioned earlier, first and only cutting board I've ever made. I do plan on making more, but if you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. If I can answer your question, I will. Or if you just have a tip or suggestion of maybe what I did wrong with the epoxy, why it didn't cure. I'm thinking I just didn't mix long enough, but who knows. But give me that thumbs up. If you like what I do, hit the subscribe button. I've got a bunch of other videos covering various topics, anything from woodworking, sewing, motorcycle repair, appliance repair, all kinds of stuff. It's just who I am. I dabble in a little bit of everything. So, till next time, guys. See you later.